Hi, and thanks for hitting the snooze button. My name's Neil Headley. I was prepared to write off a literal lifelong battle with insomnia as just being one of the risks of the job when I took on a 30-year career in morning television and radio. Well, I dug a little bit deeper and it turned out that I've got a lot more to learn. So in this series, we're going to fix your sleep. Yeah, by figuring out why mine is so horribly broken, and maybe you and I can stumble upon some answers together. We're going to be talking to neuroscientists and sleep researchers in this series from all over the world. We're going to be talking to celebrities and high achievers who have sleep challenges built into their day-to-day experience and figure out how they made it through their big, potentially sleepless night to be able to perform at the top of their game the next day. We'll get into all of that coming up in just a little bit. First, before we get to any of that, we've got this week's Beditorial. I want to tell you about this week's episode. I've never had to record a preamble before, but for some reason this time around I felt like I should. If you're new to the show, here's what's different about Season 2. In Season 1, we were filled with neuroscientists and sleep researchers from all over the world. Now, those folks are sticking around in Season 2, but we're also adding in celebrities and high achievers, many of whom have names that you will recognize. The common thread through these celebrities and high achievers is that they all had at least one really big day in their lives, maybe even a whole ton of big days. Maybe it was the Super Bowl or one of their several Super Bowls or the day their trillion-dollar company went public. A couple weeks from now, our guest will tell us about being just the 10th woman in history to walk in space. A couple weeks ago, it was Chilina Kennedy talking about what it's like to have the show that you're the star of opening on Broadway. For the purposes of this show, though, I'm less interested in the big day than I am about the night before the big day, because as a lifelong lousy sleeper, I am fascinated by the people who can overcome the jitters and the busy minds that would easily have kept me awake all night. I want to find out what they did to fall asleep the night before their big day, tried the thing myself to see if it works. So I start looking for people who faced some kind of incredible pressure to be on top of their game but had to fall asleep the night before. I have this annoying habit, well, actually a lot of annoying habits, but the one that's particularly relevant here, of being able to separate people from their jobs. It's why I have such a big problem with gossip columnists and paparazzi, because I think once famous people are done their work for the day, they just go back to being people, and their lives are none of our business. As I'm fond of saying, even Tom Hanks goes to the bathroom. You know, they're just humans. As we're recording this episode, for example, the defense has just rested in the murder of George Floyd, and people are online vilifying the defense attorney, Eric Nelson, except that I look at Eric Nelson and I see a guy who's just doing his job. As much as I believe his client deserves to be convicted, he's just a guy doing a job. So this week I'm going to challenge you to do the same. If you are incapable of seeing other people as human beings simply because they disagree with you about something, that's your burden to bear and something beyond the scope of this show. But I've got a hunch that this guest has some things to say that you might find interesting, even if you disagree with what she did on her really big day. Our guest this week is Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett. She is the delegate from the Virgin Islands, but perhaps more prominently, you know her as a member of the prosecution team from the second impeachment of President Donald Trump. Now, here's what's interesting. There are three kinds of people when I say something like that. There are the ones that heard me say Trump prosecutor and can't wait to hear her talk because they hate Trump. Then there are the people who heard me say Trump prosecutor and dismissed this entire episode out of hand because what could she possibly have that was of value to say because she doesn't like Donald Trump. And in the middle, there's me, and hopefully you, and hopefully a ton of other people as well who see a person, a wife, a mom, a fellow human being who had an incredibly unique experience and what it's like to be in that position. That's what I hope to answer for you this week. Weeks before we did this interview, though, I let the Congresswoman know that I don't want to talk politics. I don't want to talk policy. I don't want to talk about any of those things because to me, this isn't about politics. But what I did recognize is that there would be people who were incapable of separating the politics from the person. So you know what I did? I reached out to a whole mess of Republicans in Washington, congressmen, senators. Every single one of them said no. So if you're concerned about the perception of a political slant with this week's episode, all I can tell you is that I did absolutely everything I could have, and every single Republican I went to turned down the opportunity to come on the show. I would love to have talked to Senator Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, or as you might know him, Dr. Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, because unlike some of the wannabe doctors who parade around Washington pretending they know more about science than Dr. Anthony Fauci, Bill Cassidy is actually qualified to talk about sleep. He's an actual doctor, and in his state, 38% of the people have some kind of a sleep problem. That's higher than the national average. So even if Senator Cassidy didn't see this as a place where he could score enough political points to make a difference, I would have thought that Dr. Cassidy might have at least found this to be an interesting conversation. But on with this week's guest. So, Congresswoman Plaskett, I am going to ask you the very same first question that everybody that's been on the show gets, regardless of whether you're a Broadway star or a world-class neuroscientist, and that question is this: how did you sleep last night?
I'm not a great sleeper. So
in general, not a great sleeper, or just last night?
In general.
Oh, okay. Okay. So we've got some digging to do here. So what happens?
I've been told that I don't sleep well.
Oh, are you in the same boat that I am, where my wife, I got the elbow in the ribs and?
No, I just don't sleep very long.
Not long. So does it take you long to fall asleep?
No, once I put my head down finally, I'm pretty gone, but I don't sleep very long. I go to sleep pretty late, and I'm up a couple of times, and then finally just get up because I can't take it anymore, and I'm tired of pretending like I'm laying in the bed sleeping.
I had the same. I had the very same night last night, and as much as I've talked to neuroscientists and sleep researchers and whatnot from all over the world, I still don't have answers, which is kind of the genesis of this entire project as I try to find some answers for how to sleep better. So if we talk about, let's backpedal for a second here. Talk to me about, I know I said early on that I didn't want to get into the weeds on politics and policy and all those kinds of things, but you and I are connecting at a time when there's a lot going on the planet. So is it that there are many, many things keeping you awake at night right now, like there are for me and so many others?
I generally, for most of my the time that I can remember, have not really been a sleeper. Like, as a child, I was the child that you had to make go to bed. Like, I don't want to go to bed.
Right.
I don't want to miss something. I may miss something. And I have a family, a Caribbean family, which culturally wakes up very early because you want to be up before the sun is very strong. So people on the island where I live, and my parents, having been raised there, are up, 5 a.m. is a normal waking time. And so if I'm going to bed at 12, 1, and then waking up, before 5, generally not probably getting the best amount of sleep. However, since I have come into this office, I find that I have a different kind of sleep, that it's much more strenuous while I'm asleep. I'm a terrible teeth grinder, and wear an apparatus to go to sleep because of that, and wear an apparatus now because I actually ground teeth to the point of them cracking.
Wow.
And that really became pronounced after 2017, when there were hurricanes that devastated the Virgin Islands, and I found myself unable to sleep, and when I did sleep was constantly just thinking about hurrying up and sleep to get up to start the next day because there was stuff to do. So that hasn't ended really for me. There are new crises now in the country.
Yeah, exactly. And you're kind of a hero of mine for wearing an apparatus to sleep, because I can't. I went to a sleep lab and they tried to put, because they say I have mild sleep apnea, and they tried to put one of those masks on me to sleep. And I'm like, no wonder Darth Vader was so angry in all the Star Wars movies, because he constantly had that thing stuck to his face. I couldn't imagine trying to fall asleep with one of those on, and it did not work out. So if you found a way to navigate sleep with something stuck to your face.
I have to put it in my mouth. It's like a custom fit thing.
Yep.
And then that usually is the signal that I'm going to wake up shortly, because around 3 o'clock, I can't take it anymore, and I take it out. And I sleep for maybe a half an hour more, and then I'm up.
So have you, and I don't want to dig too far into your personal medical history here, but have you been to a sleep lab before? Have you been to a sleep specialist?
No.
Okay, see, you're a candidate. You're the person, you're exactly the kind of person that I would say, just for the heck of it, you should sit down with a sleep doctor, because in my own case, I had my notions of what was causing my sleep problems or why I was such a lousy sleeper. I had the same kind of description as you. I mean, the circumstances that led to me becoming a lousy sleeper were much darker and more horrific. But in my own case, I've been a terrible sleeper since the age of 6, and I thought I knew why. Until I went to a sleep lab and a doctor put all the electrodes on my head and made me spend a night there sleeping on what effectively is a sheet of cardboard. It's a hospital mattress. We know how comfortable those are. And then once they analyzed all my stuff, they said, oh no, you've got this and this and this going on. These are why you're a terrible sleeper, not whatever it was you had told yourself was making you a terrible sleeper. In your own case, generally, let's go generally speaking for a second. What are the things that you lean on when you can't sleep and you do have to get to sleep?
I read. And I have, a glass of bourbon.
Hello. That takes us down a whole other road. There's like 3 episodes on why that's a terrible idea. But the reading thing, you had me at reading, because that's perfect. Now, let's go back, and so many of the season 2 episodes of this show and the focus of the book is going to be talking to people who, like you, have had a colossally massive day, perhaps some would even say a historic day, in their lives. A couple of weeks ago, we talked to my friend Chilina Kennedy about what it was like the night before she opened on Broadway playing Carole King in the Carole King musical that was on Broadway forever. In a couple more weeks, we're going to talk to Nicole Stott, an astronaut who just became only the 10th woman in history to do a spacewalk. And so we're going to talk about what was that night before like, trying to get to sleep, all those things. You had a colossally big day in history. And of course, we all watched it unfold on most of the news channels, except for the ones that deliberately stayed away from it. Talk to me about the night before, and I'm just going to say it out loud. The night before you began the second impeachment of Donald Trump, and there you are on the prosecution team. You're going to sleep the night before. Tell me how on earth that even played out, because I can't even imagine getting to sleep in those circumstances.
Well, as I said, I go to sleep pretty late. And I had spent maybe 3 or maybe 4 hours going over my presentation, going through the theories of the case again, watching the news to hear what different commentators were saying about it, reading memorandums, and then around midnight deciding I really should get some sleep. And so I do I take great showers with great smelling, moisture enriching, I'm very particular about the kind of soap products and lotions and oils and shea butters that I use before I go to bed, and rolled my hair up because I had beautiful curls that night. I think I may have I'm not really good about putting moisturizer on my face. I do my whole body, and then put my mouth guard in, and then turned over to my husband and moan and complain about how terrible I'm going to be the next day.
Well, if I can say this in a completely non-political way, you were pretty great the next day. That's kind of the thing, right? Is because you had the eyes of the world on you, and you didn't have the option to be kind of off your game the next morning. But it sounds like you're in that category of people who sleep just shows up when you've run out of other things to do. Am I close?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
I clean. You can always tell when I'm have something really huge going on because I clean. So I think I did spend time in the kitchen, like mopping, and even Windexing the glass because I wanted things to look a certain way when I woke up, and have my fresh cup of coffee and it to be bright and pretty and everything very nice when I woke up that morning.
Right.
Yeah, then when I finally laid to bed and I turn over and I'm like, I'm gonna be so bad, it's gonna be so terrible. Can you rub my back for me? And so,
Right.
I'm a little kid and he's like, you're ridiculous, you've been preparing, and then rubs my back.
If you ever get to the White House, the whole cleaning thing is out the window because they have people that do that for you.
I like that. That's therapy. That and cooking are therapy for me.
Really? What's your go-to? What's your thing you cook?
Our Caribbean dishes.
Okay.
So things that I recall from childhood.
Nice.
The oxtail, salmon, fried fish, stewing down salted codfish. Our national dish, which is called colossally, which is spinach and okras and other things, along with every kind of seafood you can imagine and smoked meats. So things that take a whole day to cook. But then I
Are
have to call 10 people to come over and eat it because it's too much just for us.
Nice. Does that all fall under the heading of comfort food for you, or are those things you would think of cooking if you've got some sleep stuff coming up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Now, in terms of, gosh, there's so much I want to talk to you about. We talked about the getting up early as being a cultural thing, and I'm eager to get your comments on a study that's out there from Dr. Dana Johnson from Emory University, who did a lot of digging into people's sleep problems and found out, and this may be news to you, it may be news to the people that are listening and watching us right now, found out that the black community has, on the whole, far more sleep problems than any other group. So far worse than white people, far worse than brown people, far worse than Asians, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yet complain about it the least out of any possible racial group as well. And what Dr. Johnson talked about, and she talked about it on this show, was the idea that terrible sleep among the black population and the never complaining about it both are products of slavery, when sleep was seen through some eyes as laziness, and
Yes.
complaining about it was
Yes.
especially seen as laziness, right?
Yes.
What
Yes.
do you
I
think
mean,
of
I
that?
was I was raised. I can hear my mother saying, "Don't let the sun find you in bed." That being in bed while the sun was up is being lazy. That there are so many things that you could have been gotten done during the day.
Is that just another one of the signs that, because your own mother said that to you, is that still another one of the signs that even though people would like to point to the calendar and think that we've left those days far behind us, that we've obviously still got a lot more work to do?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not the getting up because, I think that's a great thing. I think, there's stuff to do. And I do that with my own children, but maybe the part about not complaining about it, that stuffing that stuff down is probably not a good thing. I mean, I'm tired all the time, but I would never tell people that. That doesn't sound appropriate to say that you're tired.
Sure, sure. The Virgin Islands. What time do kids go to school in the morning in the Virgin Islands?
8.
See, because there's this whole conversation happening on a national basis now, and I'm sure you're aware of it, of the research that's all out there that talks about how if you delay school times for kids, and we're talking high school kids, that their grades get better, they're less likely to get into drugs and alcohol, things like that. There's a 16% reduction in teenage car accidents and all those sorts of things. There
I
are
can believe
states...
it.
Sorry?
I can believe that.
Yeah, there are states where that's getting traction, and there are states that are making moves to push school start times later because it's all hormonal. I mean, there are people who would like to write that off as laziness and that teenagers are inherently lazy and addicted to TikTok and whatnot, but it's actually just that when you're a teenager, and we all remember what your teenage years did to your hormones, it's because of the different way your body produces melatonin, which of course is the sleep hormone, when you're a teenager, and it kicks in at 11 o'clock at night, and it kicks in, it leaves sometime around 8 or 9 o'clock the next morning. And so the science says your kids should be getting out of bed at about 8 o'clock instead of being at school at 8 o'clock if you want to hit all these performance markers and give them the best shot at succeeding. But how hard is it for someone who does what you do for a living,
Right.
confronted with the science of something like that, to go back and affect change?
Well, what would be interesting is I'd love to maybe talk to our Department of Education, because after the hurricanes of 2017, we didn't have sufficient schools that were still standing, and so the children went to school in shifts. So I'm wondering what the scores would be for the kids who had to go to school in the afternoon as opposed to the ones who were going in the morning. I wonder if they've kept and seen if there's a difference. I'm making a note to myself to check into that.
See, I love that you came on the show and you walked away with homework. I love that. I love when that happens. And at your suggestion, I'm going to think about books, and you said shea butters and wonderful scented soaps and shampoos, and apparently having someone rub lotion on me if I'm having trouble getting to sleep. Am I close?
That's part of it. I don't know who's watching this, but something else helps really well also, but I didn't want to, discuss that.
Okay, all right then. Thank you for the time. I appreciate you making room in a very busy day when there's a lot going on in the world, and making time for me and the 100 million or so people that in North America that are having trouble sleeping. I'm grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
All right, so we're going to take all of that massive package of information that we just got from Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett, and we are going to pass it through the scientific filter that belongs to our friend Dr. Michael Grandner from the University of Arizona. We'll do that in just a second. First, I want to tell you about a special deal that we have arranged for bedheads. And a bedhead is a term of endearment that I use for all the people who have subscribed to the show and who listen to the show or watch the show on a regular basis. By the way, we're on YouTube now, in case you didn't know that. And so new episodes are always getting posted to YouTube, unless we have the occasional episode where we didn't record video. But those are on our YouTube channel. You can subscribe to that. You can subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app, whatever that happens to be. All the links and everything you need are on our website at thesnoozebutton.com, so you can get all of that there. But thesnoozebutton.com is the website that we use for all the stuff we do. And, I'm involved in a whole bunch of other web-related projects outside of the snooze button, but job number one for me is always signing up the web hosting, wherever it is that the project is going to be. Web hosting is always job one. There's always one company that I use for that. They're called Nexus Web Hosting. Well, I've arranged a special deal for you with Nexus. Here's what it is. If you go to the website neilsentme.com, neilsentme.com, it will take you to Nexus, but it will take you to Nexus in such a way that you are set up to get a special discount code that's not available to everybody. You can type in "build now" as the coupon code and get 25% off your first 3 months. And the price is already super low, because my pockets are not all that deep. So I need all the help I can get. And what they've got is great managed WordPress hosting, where there are technical nerds that keep their eye on things for you rather than you having to monitor your servers 24/7. They do all that stuff for you. They alert you when things are going on. They fix those things for you, often before you even know that something went wrong. So again, neilsentme.com. It's exactly the same web hosting infrastructure that we use. I cannot recommend them highly enough. Okay, so I'm anxious to dive into this here with my friend Dr. Michael Grandner from the University of Arizona. Michael, hi.
Hi, how are you doing?
So I'm good. We were presented with a lot of options there from Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett about the things that she uses. So here, to the best of my recollection, are the various things. And the reason that I kind of consult with Michael on all of this when I get these tips from people is because, in theory, at some point or another, I'm going to try all of these various sleep hacks out for myself, track the data from my sleep, take cognition tests on a regular basis, and see what things are having an impact. So she was talking about let's go through all of these one by one. She was talking about things like hot showers with specially scented soaps and shampoos and lotions and shea butters and all those sorts of things. And I guess that comes at it from two different perspectives. There's the scent aspect, because a lot of people will swear by things like lavender or whatnot. And then there's the hot shower part of it too. So let's unpack that. What's the efficacy of that, or what does the science say about that as a sleep aid?
Yeah, so I would say there's actually, you identified two elements, but I would actually say there's four elements in that description. So the first one being the hot shower element. So this is something that people have been talking about for decades. There's not a ton of data on this, but there is a little showing that a very hot bath or shower late at night before bed might actually help with sleep for maybe a couple reasons. One reason might be like heat is relaxing to muscles, but from a circadian perspective is I think the main part of the story, and that's that by being in a really hot bath or shower, you're raising your peripheral temperature because it's hot. And so what that might end up doing is, as soon as you get out, your core body temperature, it sets your core body temperature up to drop a little faster than it normally would. And the dropping of core body temperature is a sleep signal, because that's when we start getting sleepy, when our core body temperature starts dropping. In the middle of the night is when it's lowest. So taking a hot bath or shower is something a lot of people do at night. It might be relaxing, but it also might have this circadian effect of helping sort of hack your body temperature rhythm a little bit to prep you for sleep a little better. So that's the hot shower element. The other element is the scents. And there's little to no data on scents in sleep. There's a couple of small, as far as I remember, not super well-controlled studies. I mean, there's no big pharma company selling these things. So to do these sorts of studies well could be expensive.
Sure.
But there is some data on, I think, like lavender. I don't know to what degree it's a biological effect versus just a psychological one. But either way, I mean, if it does help people relax, that might be helpful. I don't know what it's doing for sleep, but if it might help you relax, then that's another thing. The third element is the tactile, where you're talking about like sort of like lotions and like rubbing stuff on. So actually the tactile element might also be relaxing. Again, not really a lot of data here. It also means there's not a lot of data saying that it's a bad thing, but there's just not a lot of data. But I can imagine that for people who are stressed, there is quite a bit of data on relaxation and the ability to relax. So the data on relaxation and sleep are not what a lot of people think it is. So most people assume that relaxation and ability to fall asleep go hand in hand. And it turns out they really kind of don't. That they are related. They're cousins, but not twins.
Right.
And so relaxation can definitely help with sleep, especially people who are wound up and having a hard time detaching. And relaxation is an active process, and could be mental, physical, or both. So mental relaxation are things like meditations and imagery exercises and things like that to wrangle sort of the thoughts and feelings in your head and sort of bring them back down. Physical relaxation would be like stretches and massages and muscle relaxation that could help reduce the tension in your body too. And so if there's an element here of relaxation, then that might be helping. It's important to note that relaxation alone won't fix insomnia, but we're not talking about insomnia. We're just talking about improving the ability to wind down and get to sleep. So I think that might be a third element. And the fourth element is one that's a lot more subtle in here, but I think might be powerful. And it's the element of the routine. Where if you smell the same thing, nice relaxing scent, and have a routine. I mean, even if you just have a routine where you spin around 3 times before getting into bed, and you teach your body that like whatever this random, like whatever it is you do, unless it's like an activating thing, whatever it is you're doing while you're prepping to wind down and then you get into bed, your body learns. Your brain's a pattern recognition machine, remember. So it's recognizing this pattern of a bedtime routine. Any bedtime routine has this effect, especially when it incorporates multiple senses in it. So you can have a thing that you do, like, for example, you do a breathing exercise and then brush your teeth and you put on your PJs and you get under the covers and you turn off and you have a routine that you do. When your body learns the routine, you do this with kids all the time. You teach them the routine before bed, so by the time you start the routine, the brain is going to know what's coming next, and it's going to start prepping itself. It knows sleep is coming, so it aids the wind down process. So then if you take that routine and then pair it with other things that are tactile and sensory and smells, so what'll happen is if every time you're winding down and relaxing, you're smelling scent X, whatever it is, and then you fall asleep. Smell scent X, then you fall asleep. Smell scent X, then you fall asleep. I'm not saying any particular scent might be better than any others, but if it's something you like, then what happens is whenever you start smelling it, it'll start reminding you of sleep, even subconsciously, and it can help you in that process. Just like the opposite can happen too, where we've been talking about like stimulus control, where if you get into bed and start thinking about stuff because you haven't given yourself time to wind down or whatever, and you do that over and over again, just being in bed gets your mind racing, So like that environment can teach you. So those are the four elements I think that she cobbled together there in a nice cohesive way. There's that circadian and relaxing effect of the warm bath. It's very relaxation focused. It was the relaxing effect of whatever the tactile sensation. I don't know if the smell is a component, but there's also the routine of it, the conditioning of it, that you have all these elements that go together and they fit together, and so they all work together to promote the sleep signal.
That's fascinating. Okay. So I think she made the leap from there to bourbon somehow.
Yeah.
Now, I'm no scientist, but I've talked to enough people who do what you do for a living that part of me thinks that's a horrible idea.
Well, if you talk to sleep people and you listened, it would probably be a reasonable thing to suspect that, that's not what you should do. But I will say that if she's talking about one serving of alcohol, I would guess that all the stuff that when we talk about alcohol being bad for sleep, we're not usually talking about one serving of alcohol. A glass.
We're talking about going to bed drunk.
Yeah, pretty usually. I mean, if you're having one or two glasses of wine or one or two servings of alcohol, it's probably not going to disturb your sleep very much, unless you're very sensitive to it, whatever disclaimer, asterisk, variability in the real world. But one serving of alcohol, what it'll do, it might help with that relaxation process, and it'll be a little bit sedating. It might help you fall asleep a little faster. It might also make your sleep just a little shallower, but at one serving, I don't know that I would worry about that as a bad thing too much. And if it helps, again, it's feeding into this de-escalation process of, so what she's talking about is sort of starting out here, and what are all the different mechanisms to end down here?
Okay, this is interesting because this is something we've never talked about before, but the more I hear people talk about, so you're talking about one serving of alcohol and it might help you wind down, it might make your sleep a little bit shallower. So, from a sleep doctor's perspective, which one's better? 8 hours of shallower sleep that was brought on by the glass or two of red wine, or 5.5, 6 hours of regular sleep that you eventually got into after no red wine or anything like that and having a tough time relaxing and winding down? What's the trade-off there?
Well, first I would say is, I don't know, one or two glasses of wine won't take you from 8 hours of shallow to won't make the difference between 6 hours of more solid sleep-deprived sleep versus 8 hours of shallow. That's like saying is it better to take one Tylenol and have no pain versus like being in chronic pain? It's like, well, all right, but that said, the question you're asking is a good one. It's that if it helps but also hurts a little, is that did you end up ahead? Was it a net gain or a net loss? Is really
Right.
what you're asking.
Yeah.
And honestly, at that, like if you're talking about 3 or 4, I would say it's much more likely to end up as a net loss. If you're talking about
Sure.
1 or 2, I'd say it's much less likely to end up as a net loss, and the difference is probably going to be made by individual variability in how you process alcohol and how light of a sleeper you are and all those sorts of things. So
there's no one answer that applies to everybody.
yeah, unfortunately. Unfortunately,
Oh,
but
if only that were true in the sleep world, right? If only,
Yeah.
and that's the thing that annoys me so much, and you know this because you and I have talked both on the show and off the show about this. There's so many things coming into my inbox about, I guaranteed that this thing will fix your sleep, and I'm like, no, there are no guarantees.
It's messy. It's a very messy system for good reason.
Yeah.
It's messy because it adapts, and it adapts to the environment, it adapts to what you throw at it. I mean, our sleep schedule, our sleep environment, our geographic location in the world is totally different than when our sleep evolved hundreds of thousands of years ago. And so it's so adaptable, but that's why it's messy, because it is very adaptable, and no one thing, I mean, it would be weird if one thing made a huge change and we haven't figured that out yet after 200,000 years of humanity, you know?
Right.
And
Fire, done.
Yeah,
Wheel,
right.
done. Sleep, not so much.
Right. So fire is a perfect example. Something that changed everything, and we figured it out early. That's what changes everything. Whereas people have been drinking alcohol for thousands of years, and if it was that big of a deal that a little bit of alcohol, because remember, thousands of years ago, the alcohol was much less strong. If a little bit of alcohol did terrible things to health, we would have figured that out. Same thing with caffeine. If a little bit of caffeine did terrible things, we would have stopped doing it. But the truth is,
Sure.
a little bit probably isn't that bad. For some people, it might be, but for some people, it's not. And so probably at that level, it probably depends if you're very sensitive. I mean, I wouldn't say, hey, this is my advice for getting a little bit of sleep, take a shot. But if you
Right.
say, hey, I take a shot at night, most nights, but it's only one, and my health is okay, I don't have high blood pressure, and my sleep isn't super disturbed about it, should it be high on my list of things to worry about? I would say, there are probably things higher on that list.
Fascinating. Okay. I'm hesitant to even get into the last point because, look, and people who listen or watch or whatever it is regularly know that the whole genesis of this project is a book. And the book and Michael's role in the book is to weigh in on the science parts of. So when, for example, Chilina Kennedy, who was on a couple of weeks ago, talks about the mental road imagery that she uses of walking down a path and relaxing each body part and all these different things, Michael addresses the science behind that and whether or not it works. And then what I do is I march off and I try Chilina's method for a couple weeks, and I will report back to you what my data is and all that. Great. And then, we move on to another celebrity or high-performing person. We figure out what they do. I go try that for 2 weeks. Well, we get to point number 3 in Congresswoman Plaskett's list, which seemed, to me at least, the way I heard it, was a reference to let's call it adult activities.
There you go. That's a euphemism.
As being beneficial for sleep. Certain things that are done in a bed that have nothing whatsoever to do with sleep. That was kind of, if I was picking up what she was putting down, that was what she laid out for us. And I'm hesitant to even get into this because I am terrified of having to write a chapter in a book about the 2 weeks that I spent having sex every night before I went to sleep. But here we are. Is there any data out there about sex and sleep?
There's a little, and it's interesting you bring it up. It's also because it's so, on the one hand, it's something that I think a lot of people have thought about because it's part of the human experience. But at the same time, it's got a lot of cultural baggage attached to it in terms of talking about things. I mean, from a cultural perspective, there should be no reason to be afraid to talk about it. But we're in a weird culture, and it is what it is. So
well, it's like the episode last week with Chris Winter on it, where he said everybody thinks that everything they do in bed, whether it's sleep or sex, is normal until they talk to somebody about it and they find out it's not.
Yeah, I mean, so what I would say to that is, I think the fact that anecdotally, talking to people, you hear this often. That people fall asleep afterwards, and it's very they get very relaxed afterwards. And there's this whole literature about like oxytocin and relaxing and hormones and endorphins and all this stuff. And so there's all of that, which is probably a net positive for sleep. But you could imagine though, like the data is probably thin for two reasons. One, because it's a hard thing to study logistically, and also it's a hard thing to study ethically and culturally. I mean, ideally, if this were a technique like muscle relaxation, we'd recruit people off the street, randomize them into two groups, say, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, and then see what happens. And then you can't really do that for this, or at least getting it through an ethics board is going to be a little tough. But one thing, there's a little bit of literature on this showing that it might help with sleep. But one thing that's an important caveat in this whole thing is, first of all, are you by yourself or are you with somebody? Because like the physiologic process is actually a bit different. And then more interestingly to me is the question of who are you with? And there's actually a literature on this in terms of who you're sleeping with and who you are next to, and that idea of partnership and companionship. So one of my colleagues, Wendy Troxel, she's been doing this work for years, and I remember years and years ago, hopefully not that long ago, but when we were both sort of coming up at a similar time, I'll never forget that we were talking at a conference, and she's like, all of sleep research, about biological sleep research, takes place in a laboratory with adults sleeping by themselves in an artificial situation. And she said, yeah. We talk a lot about the fact that it's an artificial situation with the being hooked up. She said, but what we don't talk about is human adults usually don't sleep by themselves. Right. And when you put someone else in the room, it changes things. And by isolating people and studying them, are we creating a situation where we're changing what we're studying, and all our data need to be filtered through that? And so she, over the next bunch of years, she actually did a lot of work on what happens like when you're sleeping with people. And one of the big things that came out is, depends on who you're sleeping next to. If you have a good relationship and if you're comfortable with that person, and if them being there gives like emotional comfort and support, like that actually might be great for sleep quality, even if they might move around more and make some noise and actually make your sleep a little more shallow.
Sure.
Objectively. But if you ask people, they'll say they slept better. Whereas if you're sleeping next to someone that you don't have a good relationship with, then it makes things worse, where now you have like the arousal centers and the vigilance is up and the safety sensors are off. And so, so I would imagine that, if you're, what does it do? My guess would be it probably helps a little based on the little data that's out there. And, the anecdotal reports of like everybody, but, how exactly and why and to what degree, not sure, but I bet it has to do with who you're with.
It's interesting too, because Wendy's been on the show. Wendy was on the show in season 1, where if you want to look it up on the website or in your podcast app, it's an episode that we called "Please Don't Make Us Call It a Sleep Divorce."
Oh yeah,
because that was the term that was hot at the time when Wendy was on the show. People were calling it a sleep divorce. The idea of, sort of the Fred and Wilma or the Rob and Laura Petrie kind of marriage, where we watched them on those TV shows and they slept in separate beds. The husband and the wife slept in separate beds, which then came to be called a sleep divorce, which, in our own case, in our family, it helped my wife sleep better because she wasn't dealing with a guy with a periodic limb movement index of 82 lying beside her. But you're right in the logistics and the ethics of it, because there's so many things going through my head. The timing, I guess, of the hormonal, forgive my use of this term, release.
Yeah.
the timing is probably really delicate. So it's not even like you could say to participants who volunteer to be part of the study, okay, have sex and then don't waste time on the afterglow. Get in the car and drive to the sleep lab. Like, right. Okay, so your results are already screwed then.
Right.
Pardon the use of that
You've missed the window.
You've missed the window. It's not like you're going to have people have sex at the sleep lab. Yeah. Because one, as far as I know, and I write about this in the book in the chapters that have already been leaked out on the internet. You've heard me say this if you listen to those chapters. The mattress in a sleep lab, here's how I compare it. You take a sheet of cardboard. Actually, that's it. You take a sheet of cardboard. That's what the mattress in a sleep lab feels like. So there's that. So you're not going to have them have sex in a sleep lab. But then on the ethical side of it, becomes the whole question, and don't worry, women who are watching or listening, I got your back right here. It precludes that the sex is sex that you enjoy.
Right.
And whether it's sex that you enjoy because it's good, or, and this gets into the darker side of the whole thing, whether it's sex that's wanted.
Right.
Because there are so many spouses out there, and I'm not going to get gender specific in the interest of just being fair. There are so many spouses out there that are having marital relations that they really wish they weren't. Mm-hmm. But they're doing it for whatever reason they are. And so then you go down that whole road as well. So if look, I know that some of the people that watch and listen to the show are like Michael, fellow sleep nerds. If you can come up with a way to do a study that actually makes sense and checks off all the boxes of ethics and whatever else,
that'd be cool.
More power to you, because that's data that would probably be useful. I just have no idea how somebody goes about studying that. Like, because you got cameras, you got the fact that it takes an hour to put all the electrodes on. So again, missed your window unless you're going to try to have sex with the electrodes on. Hey, breaking news, not sexy, not a good look.
And you can't move around too much either. I mean,
no, because you get that big wire box thing. It's
So I mean, what you highlight is the important part of that question is that for a lot of people it actually might be a good thing. We don't know a ton about it, and one of the reasons why it's complicated to study, there's sort of the ethics, and it's that it's an uncomfortable issue isn't, like we deal with all kinds of uncomfortable stuff, but because it's the pursuit of trying to find an answer. But what I think you highlight is that it's actually a very complicated question. There are many steps on the ladder from where we are and where the answer is. And it's not just a simple study design. There's lots of things that would color the results to make sure that we're seeing what we think we're seeing, which is another reason why this work isn't really done. I mean, there's lots of uncomfortable research that gets done. I mean, people do research on knee replacements and things, and those certainly aren't comfortable either.
Sure.
But I think one of the main reasons why this work isn't really done is because it's actually tricky, and you're messing with forces that are really hard to sort of wrangle and wrap our head around, that we don't quite understand yet. And there's lots of things that can color this, and I think that's an important point. But back to the story, if you're talking about somebody who's in a relationship with somebody, and this is sort of part of what they do, and this is part of how they connect with each other, and you get the physiologic benefits afterwards. There's a reason why when we talk about stimulus control, we talk about use the bed only for sleep and sex. Sex is fine.
Yep.
Because it's usually in bed. I mean, some people don't do it in bed, and they do it all kinds of places, and that's fine too. I don't judge, but doing it in bed is never. It's almost never seen as an enemy of sleep, as opposed to watching TV or being on screens or even sometimes reading, even though that's probably fine most of the time. But no, I don't think I can think of one time when someone said, whatever you do, don't have sex in bed. Do that somewhere else.
True. Yeah. And in the interest of not judging, there are people who maybe even use screens when they're... Anyway, this is such a bad road that you and I are going down.
I'm not going to go down that one.
No, I feel like there's but you know what? I almost feel like this is a broader conversation than just you and I. And offline, I got something to throw at you that's percolating up here right now. Okay. And you know the twisted ways my mind works. But okay, so I've got sort of some marching orders from Congresswoman
Okay.
Plaskett. I mean, that's 6 weeks worth of stuff, even just in my one conversation with her. So maybe I'm going to have to space her things out just a little bit. But I appreciate you weighing in with the science part of all this, Michael. I'm glad I can lean on you for all this. I'm glad you had time for it. Thank you.
No, thanks. Thanks for including me in this. It's fun to talk about, especially some of these areas that are right on the edge of what we know, but are right in the middle of what people are doing. And I think it's important to highlight that a lot of this stuff that's out there, it's not that we know it doesn't work, it's that we just don't know a lot about it formally. So it'll be interesting to see, well, what aspects of it do we know something about, and then how can we stretch our boundaries a little bit?
And there you go. Another one in the books for the Snooze Button podcast. Thanks for being here with us. Next week on the show, we explore the art of the nap with Dr. Sarah Mednick. We get into all things short sleep related. And do naps mess up your sleep? I thought they did. Or do they? Or are they beneficial? Is there a sweet spot for how long of a nap and the circumstances in which you should take on a nap? All that stuff coming up on next week's episode. And 2 weeks from now, astronaut Nicole Stott answers the question for us: how did you fall asleep the night before you became just the 10th woman in history to walk in space? All that coming up on the Snooze Button podcast. Till we get together next week, my name's Neil Headley. Hey, get some sleep, would you?